When you match his silence, you become his biggest regret. Carl Jung. My love, sometimes the loudest message you'll ever send to a man is the one you never speak. The moment you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop reaching for reassurance, something profound begins to happen inside you. The noise fades. The urgency dissolves. You step out of reaction and into awareness. And in that stillness, your power returns. Because silence, when chosen consciously, is not emptiness. It is alignment. There is a point where continuing to speak becomes self-abandonment, where every explanation feels like you're shrinking yourself just to be understood by someone who has already decided not to listen. That's when silence becomes a boundary, not a punishment, not a tactic. A boundary. You are no longer arguing with reality. You are accepting it. And acceptance is where emotional strength is born. When you match his silence, you are not copying his behavior. You are stepping out of the emotional tug-of-war entirely. You are no longer proving, persuading, or positioning yourself to be chosen. You are choosing yourself quietly, and that choice shifts everything, even if nothing is said out loud. Most people panic in silence because silence forces them to sit with truth. When there are no messages, no explanations, and no emotional negotiations, reality becomes impossible to avoid. And reality often reveals what words tried to hide. You see effort clearly. You see interest clearly. You see where you stand without illusion. Silence removes the fog. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Silence is part of that becoming. Because in silence, you stop performing for connection and start honoring your inner truth. You no longer mold yourself to keep someone close. You let the distance show you whether closeness was ever mutual. When a man pulls away, the instinctive response is fear. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of being replaced. That fear pushes people to reach, to explain, to fix. But fear-driven effort never creates security. It only teaches the other person that your peace depends on their presence. And that imbalance slowly erodes respect. Silence interrupts that imbalance. It says, "Without confrontation, I will not chase what chooses distance." It communicates self-trust. It shows emotional containment. And emotional containment is deeply powerful. It tells the other person that you are not ruled by impulse or insecurity. You are grounded. This is where silence becomes louder than words. Because words can be dismissed, argued with, or ignored. Silence cannot. Silence creates space. And in that space, reflection begins. Not because you demanded it, but because there is nothing left to distract from it. At first, he may feel relief. Relief from emotional responsibility. Relief from accountability. Relief from having to respond. But relief does not last. Silence has a way of echoing. The absence of your presence becomes noticeable. The emotional warmth you provided is suddenly missing, and the quiet that once felt freeing begins to feel unfamiliar. You see, when someone is used to your availability, they confuse it with permanence. They assume you will always be there to explain, to wait, to try again. Silence disrupts that assumption. It removes certainty. And uncertainty forces awareness. But the real transformation is not happening in him. It's happening in you. When you stop reacting, you start observing. You notice how much energy you were pouring into holding something together. You notice how often you compromised your own comfort to maintain connection. You notice how rarely your needs were truly met. Silence sharpens perception. It brings honesty. You begin to understand that peace feels better than reassurance that only lasts a moment. That dignity feels better than being chosen out of convenience. That calm feels better than chaos disguised as passion. And once you feel that difference, you cannot go back. Silence teaches you emotional discipline. The discipline to feel without acting, to miss without reaching, to care without chasing. That discipline builds self-respect. And self-respect changes how others experience you. Your energy becomes steadier. Your presence becomes rarer. Your attention becomes valuable again. This is not manipulation. This is maturity. Emotional maturity is the ability to sit with discomfort without turning it into drama. It's the ability to let go without needing the last word. It's understanding that not every connection is meant to be saved, and not every silence is meant to be broken. When you go quiet, you stop teaching people that withdrawal has no consequence. You stop rewarding inconsistency with effort. You stop confusing endurance with love. Silence becomes your reset. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Silence makes patterns conscious. It reveals who shows up when things are easy and who disappears when depth is required. It shows you whether the connection was built on mutual effort or on your emotional labor alone. And in that awareness, something shifts permanently. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You no longer need closure from someone who gave you confusion. You no longer need to explain yourself to feel valid. Your silence becomes calm, not cold. Clear, not defensive. Steady, not reactive. You realize that not responding is sometimes the most self-honoring response. That walking away quietly can be more powerful than staying and pleading to be seen. That peace is not found in resolution, but in release. And as you remain in that silence, grounded and unshaken, the dynamic continues to change. Because silence does not just remove noise, it removes illusion. And once illusion is gone, only truth remains. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." In silence, irritation turns into introspection. Without your reactions to focus on, he is left alone with his own behavior. The excuses lose their audience. The justifications lose their power. And what remains is self-confrontation. This is why silence feels so heavy. It doesn't distract. It doesn't soothe. It doesn't validate. It simply reflects. But again, the real shift is happening within you. As the days pass without reaction, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Relief. Not relief from him, but relief from the emotional burden you were carrying. The burden of trying to maintain balance alone. The burden of overthinking every interaction. The burden of managing someone else's emotional availability. You realize how much space you are giving away. Silence gives that space back. And in that space, your identity strengthens. You begin to remember who you were before the anxiety, before the waiting, before the constant emotional adjustment. You reconnect with your rhythm, your interests, your inner stability. You stop organizing your emotions around someone else's presence or absence. This is where detachment begins. Not as coldness, but as clarity. Detachment is not indifference. It is freedom from emotional dependency. It is the understanding that you can care deeply without centering your worth on someone else's response. And that understanding is transformative. It shifts you from seeking validation to embodying self-trust. You stop asking, "Why isn't he showing up?" and start asking, Why did I accept so little for so long? That question alone changes everything. Silence makes room for self-respect to grow, and self-respect quietly rewrites your standards. You become less tolerant of inconsistency, less available for emotional confusion, less willing to explain your needs to someone who keeps ignoring them. You don't announce this change, you live it, and people feel it. Your energy becomes different, less reactive, more grounded. You are no longer pulled into emotional highs and lows by someone else's behavior. You respond when you choose. You engage when it aligns. You no longer feel the urge to fix, chase, or rescue. This is what emotional independence looks like. Calm, centered, self-contained. From the outside, it looks like confidence. From the inside, it feels like peace. Meanwhile, the silence continues to do its work, not as a strategy, but as a consequence. Because when someone loses access to your emotional world, they are forced to face the gap they created. Some will step forward, others will stay away. And that response tells you everything you need to know. Silence becomes a filter. The one who truly values you will feel the distance and want to bridge it. Not with excuses, not with half effort, but with clarity and intention. The one who doesn't will remain comfortable in the quiet. And in that comfort, they reveal their limits. Either way, you win, because you are no longer waiting in uncertainty. You are watching in awareness. There is a subtle confidence that grows when you stop reacting. It's not loud, it's not performative, it's internal. It's the confidence that comes from knowing you will not abandon yourself for connection, that no matter how someone behaves, you will remain aligned with your values. That confidence changes how you move through the world. You stop chasing emotional intensity and start choosing emotional stability. You stop romanticizing potential and start honoring consistency. You stop confusing longing with love. And silence helps you see the difference. You also begin to understand something deeper. That attraction is not built through constant availability. It is built through presence and absence in balance, through self-possession, through emotional containment. When you are no longer trying to hold someone's attention, your attention becomes valuable. This is not a game. It is natural law. Energy flows toward what is centered. People are drawn to those who are grounded within themselves. And when you reclaim your center through silence, you become magnetic without trying. You notice that you no longer need closure from him. The silence itself provided it, because closure does not come from answers. It comes from acceptance. Acceptance of what is. Acceptance of what was. Acceptance of what you deserve. And that acceptance softens you. It doesn't harden you. You become more discerning, not more guarded. You become selective, not closed. You learn to listen to behavior instead of words. Silence sharpens that listening. As time passes, the emotional charge fades. You no longer feel the same pull to reach out. The urgency dissolves. What once felt unbearable now feels manageable. And that is growth. You realize that the silence did not take anything from you. It gave you something back, yourself. And in that regained self, a new standard quietly forms. A standard that says you will only engage where effort is mutual, where communication is clear, where presence is consistent, where silence is not used as control but as peace. That standard does not need to be spoken. It will be felt by anyone who enters your space. The silence you chose did not end the connection. It revealed its truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. As you remain steady in that awareness, something else begins to unfold. Not just clarity about him, but clarity about love itself, about what you will no longer accept, about what you are now ready to receive. And that is where the real shift begins. And when clarity settles in, it does not arrive as a dramatic realization. It arrives quietly. You wake up one day and notice that the ache is softer. The urge to reach out is weaker. The questions that once consumed your mind no longer demand answers. You are no longer waiting for a sign. You are no longer interpreting silence as rejection. You understand now that silence was information all along. This is the phase where your power becomes internalized. You are no longer measuring your strength by whether he notices your absence. You are measuring it by how calm you feel within it. That is the difference between silence as a tactic and silence as truth. One seeks a reaction, the other creates freedom. You begin to recognize how much of your emotional energy was tied to anticipation, waiting for replies, waiting for effort, waiting for reassurance. Silence breaks that attachment. It teaches your nervous system that you are safe, even without constant validation. And that lesson changes you at a deep level. Carl Jung said, "Where your fear is, there your task is." The fear of silence was never about losing him. It was about losing the illusion that you needed him to feel whole. Silence forces you to face that fear directly. And once you face it, it loses its power over you. As your emotional dependence dissolves, something subtle but profound takes its place. Self-trust. You begin to trust your instincts again. You trust your perceptions. You trust that when something feels off, it probably is. You no longer gaslight yourself into believing that inconsistency is normal or that confusion is romantic. You stop romanticizing emotional distance. This is where your standards recalibrate. Not because you made a list or set rules, but because your body remembers what peace feels like. And once your body remembers peace, it resists chaos. You become less tolerant of mixed signals, less patient with half effort, less willing to carry emotional weight alone. Silence sharpens discernment. You start noticing how different people respond to your boundaries. Some respect them immediately, others push against them, others disappear altogether. And none of those responses are mistakes. They are information. Silence reveals who is aligned with you and who only thrived in your overgiving. What's remarkable is how your presence changes even when you say nothing. Your energy feels steadier. Your reactions are measured. You are no longer emotionally loud because you are emotionally secure. And that security alters how others perceive you. You become harder to manipulate, harder to confuse, harder to pull into emotional chaos. Not because you are closed off, but because you are centered. This is when silence becomes less about him and more about you. You are no longer monitoring his behavior. You are monitoring your own alignment. You ask yourself different questions now. Does this feel respectful? Does this feel mutual? Does this feel calm? And if the answer is no, you don't argue with it. You accept it. That acceptance is strength. People often think attraction comes from intensity, from constant communication, from emotional fireworks. But lasting attraction comes from emotional stability, from knowing where you stand, from consistency, from calm confidence. And silence cultivates that confidence naturally. When you stop reacting, you stop giving your emotional authority away. You no longer hand someone else the power to determine your mood. You decide how you feel, regardless of their actions. That is emotional sovereignty. And emotional sovereignty is deeply attractive, not because it tries to be, but because it is rare. If he feels your absence, It will not be because you disappeared dramatically. It will be because your energy is no longer available to be taken for granted. And if he doesn't feel it, that tells you something equally important. Silence gives you answers without humiliation. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Silence teaches you where communication was never truly possible. It shows you that sometimes the loneliness you felt wasn't because you were alone, but because you were emotionally unseen. And that realization frees you from trying to be heard by someone who is never listening. As time moves forward, you begin to integrate this lesson. You carry it into new connections. You speak more intentionally. You listen more carefully. You leave sooner when something feels misaligned. You don't over-explain your boundaries. You don't justify your needs. You trust that the right people won't require persuasion. Your silence becomes a quiet form of leadership. It leads you away from chaos and toward alignment. It teaches others how to treat you by showing them what you will no longer tolerate. Not through confrontation, but through consistency. You are no longer afraid of losing people. You are more concerned with losing yourself. And that shift is everything. When you look back, you realize that the silence was not an ending. It was an initiation. An initiation into emotional adulthood, into self-respect, into discernment, into peace. You understand now that not every connection is meant to last. Some are meant to teach. And silence was the lesson that taught you how to choose yourself without guilt. There is a quiet pride that comes with this stage. Not arrogance, not coldness, pride in your restraint, pride in your growth, pride in the fact that you did not react when it would have been easier to collapse. You held yourself together. And because you held yourself together, you are no longer easily pulled apart. The silence you once feared has become your anchor. It keeps you grounded when emotions rise. It reminds you that you do not need to respond to everything, that you are allowed to pause, that you are allowed to protect your energy. You no longer chase closure, you create it. And in this stillness, something else becomes clear. You are not waiting anymore. You are moving forward, quietly, confidently, without announcement. Your life continues. Your joy returns. Your focus shifts inward. And whatever happens next, whether he reaches out or remains distant, no longer defines you. Because silence taught you the most important truth of all. You were always whole. And from that wholeness, something irreversible takes shape inside you. You no longer relate to lack. You no longer reach for emptiness. You no longer attach your worth to whether someone chooses you or drifts away. The silence has done its work. It stripped you down to what is real. And what is real is steady. You begin to notice how differently you move now. You don't rush conversations. You don't fill pauses with nervous explanations. You don't overextend to keep someone interested. You let moments breathe. You let people show you who they are without interrupting them with effort. That restraint is not distance, it is confidence. This is where silence turns into discernment. You see how people reveal themselves when they are no longer being managed by your emotional labor. You notice who steps forward with clarity and who stays vague, who asks questions and who avoids responsibility, who values presence and who only values access. Silence gives you this vision because you are no longer clouding it with hope. Hope, when misplaced, is dangerous. It keeps you invested in potential instead of reality. Silence dissolves false hope. It replaces it with truth. And truth, while sometimes painful, is always grounding. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Silence forces soul-facing. When there is no reaction to distract from accountability, people either rise to meet themselves or retreat into avoidance. You are no longer responsible for which one they choose. That burden is no longer yours. What changes most is your relationship with uncertainty. Before, uncertainty triggered anxiety. Now it triggers observation. You no longer need immediate answers to feel okay. You understand that clarity unfolds with time, and rushing it only distorts it. Silence teaches you to trust timing instead of forcing outcomes. You stop fearing endings. You stop clinging to what feels unstable. You understand that anything meant for you will not require you to betray your peace to keep it. That understanding becomes a filter for your life, not just in love, but in friendships, work, and self-expectations. Your standards rise quietly. You don't announce them, you embody them. You respond less. You choose more carefully. You invest where there is consistency, not intensity. You give your energy where it is met, not where it is tolerated. And because of that, your presence becomes intentional, sacred. People sense this shift. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. Your calm is different now. It is not performative. It does not seek reassurance. It is grounded, and grounded energy changes dynamics effortlessly. If he returns, it will not be to the version of you that waited. It will be to someone who has moved forward internally. Someone who no longer negotiates self-respect for connection. Someone who listens to behavior more than promises. And that difference will be felt immediately. And if he does not return, the silence will still have fulfilled its purpose, because it returned you to yourself. It restored your center. It reminded you that love should expand you, not destabilize you. That connection should feel safe, not confusing. That effort should be mutual, not one-sided. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You understand that the right people will not require constant explanation. You no longer fear being alone. You understand that being at peace is better than being emotionally crowded. Silence has refined you. It taught you that your emotions are valuable and deserve respect, including your own. That not every feeling needs an audience. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing. To wait, to observe, to choose. You realize now that silence was never about him learning a lesson. It was about you learning yours. Learning when to step back. Learning when to stop giving. Learning when to choose dignity over desire. And that lesson stays with you. It shows up the next time someone pulls away. You don't panic. You don't chase. You pause. You feel. You decide. It shows up the next time you feel the urge to over-explain. You stop. You trust yourself. You let silence speak. Because silence is no longer something that happens to you. It is something you use wisely. You understand that emotional power does not come from controlling others. It comes from controlling yourself. From knowing when to engage and when to disengage. From trusting that what is aligned will not need to be forced. This is the calm after the storm. Not empty, not cold, but clear. And as you stand in this clarity, one final truth settles in gently, without resistance. You did not lose anything by going silent. You gained yourself. And once you gain yourself, you stop negotiating your worth in silence or in sound. You no longer feel the need to prove that you mattered, because you finally understand that someone's inability to hold you does not diminish the value of what you brought. Silence completes its work when you no longer need it to send a message. When it is no longer a response but a state of being, this is where peace settles in your body. You notice it in the way you breathe, in the way you move through your day without checking your phone compulsively, in the way your thoughts are no longer looping around someone else's behavior. You are present again, fully. And presence is the greatest sign of healing. You understand now that silence was never about control. It was about alignment. It aligned you with your truth. It aligned you with your boundaries. It aligned you with the part of you that knows love should not feel like constant effort or emotional uncertainty. That alignment becomes your compass. You no longer romanticize emotional unavailability. You no longer confuse distance with depth. You no longer interpret inconsistency as mystery. You see things as they are, not as you hoped they would become. And that clarity is freeing. What once felt like loss now feels like release. You don't resent him. You don't need him to regret anything. You don't need validation from his realization. You are no longer waiting for an apology, an explanation, or a return. The silence already gave you what you needed. It gave you resolution without dependence. You understand something fundamental now. People do not leave because you were not enough. They leave because they were not ready, not willing, or not capable. And none of that is yours to fix. You stop internalizing other people's limitations. If he ever thinks of you, it will not be because you chased or begged or demanded. It will be because your absence carried dignity, because you did not collapse when he withdrew, because you chose composure over chaos. That memory stays with people. Calm stays with people. But even that no longer matters the way it once did, because your focus has shifted inward, toward your growth, toward your joy, toward your life. You invest your energy where it is returned. You build connections that feel steady instead of draining. You allow yourself to be met instead of proving yourself. Silence taught you how to stop over-functioning in relationships. You learned that love is not about convincing someone to stay. It's about mutual presence, mutual effort, mutual respect. Anything less is not love. It's attachment mixed with hope, and hope, when unsupported by action, only delays healing. Now you trust action. You trust consistency. You trust how someone shows up over time. And when they don't, you don't argue with reality. You step back, quietly, gracefully. You have learned the art of emotional self-containment, of holding your feelings without letting them spill into places where they won't be honored. That doesn't make you closed. It makes you selective, and selectivity is wisdom. You no longer fear silence in others because you are no longer silent with yourself. You listen inward now. You check in with your body. You notice when something feels off, and you don't dismiss it. You respect your intuition. You trust your timing. You allow things to unfold without force. This is what emotional power looks like when it matures. It's quiet. It's steady. It doesn't need an audience. You don't announce that you've changed. People notice. They feel it. Your energy no longer asks. It allows. Your presence no longer chases. It attracts. Your boundaries no longer explain. They exist. And the most important shift of all happens here. You stop seeing silence as something that happened because someone pulled away. You see it as something you chose because you grew. Silence became the space where you stopped betraying yourself, where you stopped pouring into uncertainty, where you stopped mistaking effort for love, where you finally stood still long enough to hear your own truth. And that truth is simple. You deserve consistency. You deserve clarity. You deserve peace. So when you remember this chapter, You will not remember the pain as much as the strength it revealed. You will remember the moment you stopped reacting and started rising. The moment you chose dignity over desperation. The moment silence became your teacher. Because silence did not take your voice. It returned it to you. And from here on, you only speak where your words are valued. Your presence is respected, and your heart is safe. That is the power of silence. And that is how you win. Not by being louder, but by being whole. And if these words reached you, if something inside you softened, shifted, or finally felt understood, then this message was meant for you. Because silence has a way of finding the people who need it most. If you are in that place right now, where you are learning to stop chasing, stop explaining, and start choosing yourself, I want you to know this. You are not cold. You are not cruel. You are not giving up. You are growing. And growth is quiet before it is powerful. You don't need to announce your healing. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to prove your strength. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still becoming more aware of your worth, that is enough. If this spoke to you, if you felt seen by these words, take a moment to anchor it.